story begins with Rachel trapped inside a vehicle as gunfire erupts around her. She ducks below the windows, covering her ears while bullets tear through the area outside. Rachel isn't a soldier. She's a lawyer, but her job often takes her far beyond a normal courtroom. Wealthy clients hire her to recover huge unpaid debts, and she uses lawsuits, corporate loopholes, hidden companies, and more aggressive methods to get results. Several days earlier, Rachel's mentor, Braxton, meets billionaire Salazar in the Canary Islands. Salazar owes Goldstein nearly $1 billion, and Braxton has finally forced him to acknowledge it. Salazar signs an agreement accepting the full debt along with the interest. After the meeting, Salazar's security chief, Olson, drives Braxton and his bodyguard back toward their hotel. Braxton notices his phone has almost no signal and needs to report the deal. Olson stops near a cliff where reception is supposedly better, allowing Braxton to call Bobby, one of Goldstein's executives. Braxton tells Bobby that Salazar signed everything. Bobby can hardly believe he succeeded. Then Olson suddenly kills Braxton's bodyguard. Braxton tries to escape, but the doors are locked under Olson's control. He is trapped inside with the killer. Olson deliberately makes him wait before finally unlocking the door. Braxton immediately runs, but Olson shoots him before he can get away. He takes the signed agreement from Braxton's belongings and calls Salazar to confirm that the document has been recovered. Later in New York, Rachel walks straight into Bobby's office, furious about Braxton's murder. She blames Goldstein's people for failing to protect him properly during such a dangerous billion-dollar case. Rachel demands control of Salazar's case. Bobby doesn't like the idea. He distrusts her methods, and hiring her will cost a fortune. Still, Rachel refuses to back down. After negotiating, they reach a deal. She gets 10% of whatever she recovers, plus $10 million up front. Rachel immediately starts investigating Salazar's finances. She discovers that his empire is buried beneath hundreds of false names, shell companies, proxies, and corporate fronts. A normal legal fight could take years, so she decides to attack him from two directions. Her regular legal team handles lawsuits, records, filings, and corporate research. For the dirtier work, she uses two specialist groups. Bronco leads the first team, which handles direct operations such as sabotage, intimidation, disruption, and extraction. Sid controls the second, using bribery, surveillance, corrupt contacts, compromised officials, and planted information. The next day, Rachel and Bronco visit Salazar's lawyer, Horowitz, pretending to be potential clients. Everything stays calm until Rachel mentions Salazar. Horowitz immediately becomes nervous and calls security. When a guard enters, Bronco makes it very clear that forcing them out would be a serious mistake. The threat is enough to stop the guard and keep Horowitz in his chair. Rachel explains that she now represents Goldstein and intends to recover Salazar's debt. She demands a complete list of Salazar's hidden companies, including every shell corporation and proxy connected to him. Horowitz refuses to cooperate and orders them to leave. Rachel expected resistance. Soon afterward, Bronco and Baker travel to an island where Salazar has business operations and establish a temporary base. Meanwhile, Sid begins targeting one of Salazar's hotel projects in Saudi Arabia. He secretly gives authorities information showing that the development is much larger than its approved plans allow. Inspectors move in and shut construction down. The unfinished project immediately starts losing about $4 million every week, and Horowitz quickly suspects Rachel is behind it. Sid then creates another problem. He drives to the construction site and deliberately hits the superintendent's car, making the crash look accidental. Sid pretends to be shaken, while his partner Gucci arrives posing as a helpful doctor. After examining the superintendent, Gucci claims the man is medically unable to work and should take 6 weeks off. Then they reveal the real incentive by throwing a large amount of cash into his vehicle. The superintendent counts the money and accepts the arrangement. He agrees to support their version of the accident and stay away from the project. Soon Horowitz receives more bad news. A shipment of structural steel for the development has been seized because the documents don't properly match the cargo. Now the project faces more delays, penalties, and logistical problems. Salazar's weekly losses rise from roughly $4 million to nearly $5 million. Bronco and Baker attack another part of Salazar's empire. Disguised as workers, they enter one of his oil rigs. Baker suggests destroying the next delivery, but Bronco wants something less obvious. A major explosion would attract too much attention. Instead, he wants the shutdown to look like an internal mechanical failure. They place a small device inside a valve. It doesn't look important, but it disrupts the system enough to stop the rig. Safety inspectors are then tipped off about the malfunction, forcing the operation to remain closed. Every day the rig stays offline costs Salazar about $500,000. With problems spreading across his businesses, Salazar finally calls Horowitz and demands an explanation. Horowitz tells him the obvious answer: Rachel. Salazar wants her killed, but Horowitz warns him that doing so would change nothing. Rachel planned for that possibility before the campaign began. If she dies, 20 prepaid lawyers will continue the operation without her. Killing Rachel wouldn't stop the attack. It would only eliminate the one person who might still negotiate. Horowitz estimates that the combined damage from the hotel development, legal pressure, disrupted shipments, and oil rig shutdown is already costing Salazar around $28 million each month. He advises Salazar to reach some kind of agreement before the losses become worse. Still, Horowitz believes they have one advantage. Rachel hasn't discovered the most important and valuable parts of Salazar's hidden financial network. At least that's what he thinks. During Rachel's earlier visit to Horowitz's office, Branko secretly planted a listening device. Rachel has been hearing private conversations ever since. One name keeps coming up: Wolfgang. Wolfgang is officially Salazar's accountant, but his real role is much bigger. He controls the movement and concealment of Salazar's fortune, shifting assets through layers of shell companies and making the money extremely difficult to trace. Rachel realizes that Wolfgang may be the key to uncovering Salazar's entire financial network. Soon, Sid gets his chance in Jeddah, where Wolfgang is holding a private party. Sid enters posing as a wealthy businessman interested in investments and eventually joins a backgammon game. He wins repeatedly, but not because he's lucky. He's using weighted dice to control the results. What really catches Wolfgang's attention is that Sid refuses to take any of the money he wins. After watching him do this several times, Wolfgang becomes suspicious and challenges him personally. Sid accepts and wins again. Instead of collecting his winnings, Sid suggests one more game with only $10 on the line. Wolfgang agrees, and this time Sid intentionally loses. Sid claims he isn't carrying cash and promises to send payment later. Not long afterward, Wolfgang receives a package at his office. Inside is a decorative statue that blends perfectly with the other items in his collection, but the statue isn't just a gift. Wolfgang's computer network is protected by a firewall that makes remote hacking almost impossible. Rachel's hacker, Clover, needs a device close to the system to get inside. Hidden inside Sid's statue is exactly that. Once Wolfgang places it in his office, Clover gains access to the network. Within days, Rachel collects enough financial evidence to convince a judge to issue international orders targeting Salazar's assets. Horowitz finally calls Rachel and offers $300 million to settle everything. Rachel immediately refuses. She tells him that if Salazar wants a deal, he'll have to speak with her himself. Expecting that meeting to happen on Salazar's island, Rachel sends Sid, Branko, and the rest of the team there first. Their new mission isn't sabotage. This time, they need to build an escape plan in case Salazar decides Rachel won't be leaving alive. Branko gathers everything they might need, including an ambulance, a police vehicle, several getaway cars, and a large supply of weapons. Their safe house is hidden in a remote part of the island. It's also positioned near 3 possible extraction points and close to old tunnels that could provide secret escape routes. The problem is that nobody knows where Salazar will meet Rachel. It could be his hotel or his private villa. So the team prepares for both. A normal helicopter would be the fastest escape option, but Salazar closely monitors the island's airspace. Any regular aircraft would be spotted quickly. Instead, they bring in gyrocopters, which are smaller and much less noticeable. They begin testing the first escape route through the city. Using a car immediately proves to be a bad idea. Heavy traffic brings them almost to a stop, meaning Rachel could easily get trapped during a real extraction. So they try motorcycles. The bikes cut through traffic much faster, but their aggressive riding soon attracts the police. When officers give chase, the team doesn't stop. They use the pursuit as a live test. They race through narrow gaps, take sharp turns, and push toward the edge of the city with police vehicles behind them. Eventually, they reach a stormwater channel and ride down into the drainage system. The police cars can't follow, allowing them to disappear and reach the eastern extraction point. Next, they test the gyrocopters. Another weakness appears immediately. Preparing them for takeoff takes too long. Branko and Sid make the crew repeat the procedure until every aircraft can be ready within 3 minutes. They then inspect the western escape route near Salazar's villa. An old tunnel provides good cover, but the exit creates another problem. It opens near a ravine with no easy way across. Going around would take too much time. Bronco solves it by installing a zip line across the gap. ATVs are hidden on the other side, so anyone crossing can continue the escape immediately. For the next several days, the team repeatedly practices all 3 routes. They time every section, including turns, tunnels, vehicle changes, and extraction points. Any obstacle that might cause a delay is identified and dealt with before the real operation begins. Their combat training is just as serious. They practice shooting while moving, firing from motorcycles, and hitting moving targets. If the escape becomes a gunfight, everyone needs to keep fighting without stopping. They also prepare traps for pursuing vehicles. Mines are buried along several roads. Another trap, nicknamed the banana pie, is built beneath what looks like normal ground. If a vehicle drives over it, the surface collapses and drops the vehicle into the hidden pit. Once the outdoor escape routes are prepared, Sid and Bronco move on to Salazar's hotel. They enter disguised as tourists. Inside, Bronco suddenly grabs his chest and falls to the floor, pretending to have a heart attack. The hotel manager rushes over to help. While everyone is distracted, Bronco steals her master key. Sid then tells the staff that Bronco isn't having a heart attack. He claims his blood sugar is simply low and that he only needs something sweet. As the situation settles, Gucci disables the hotel's cameras. With surveillance temporarily shut down, Sid and Bronco use the stolen key to enter the penthouse and plant hidden microphones throughout the rooms. If Salazar holds any private meetings there, Rachel's team will now be able to listen. They also prepare for police interference. Devices capable of disabling engines are secretly attached beneath local police vehicles. If officers try to join a pursuit during Rachel's escape, the team may be able to stop their cars remotely. There's one more place Bronco wants information on: the prison. If someone gets arrested, he doesn't want to attempt a rescue without knowing the layout, so Sid intentionally gets himself arrested. He pours alcohol over his clothes and body to smell drunk, then starts causing trouble in public. He shouts in the street, acts aggressively, and finally urinates in full view of the police. The officers arrest him exactly as planned. Once inside the prison, Sid studies everything he can. He tracks the camera locations, counts the guards, notices their weapons, and examines how the security system operates. After he's released, he gives Bronco a full report. The prison's technology is badly outdated. Sid has even intercepted one of its wireless signals. To demonstrate how vulnerable the system is, he uses his phone to remotely open the outside gate. With that information, the team begins preparing a prison rescue plan as another backup. During these preparations, Sid notices that they're being watched. It's Olsen. Salazar's security chief is following their movements from a distance. Neither side attacks. Sid and the others simply make insulting gestures toward him, and Olsen responds in kind. By now, there's no need to pretend. Both sides know exactly who they're dealing with. With the island escape plans ready, Rachel turns back to the courts. Using the financial evidence gathered by her team, she asks a judge for permission to seize assets held directly by Salazar. The request is approved. Authorities quickly impound Salazar's private jet under international law, while his yacht is taken under maritime authority. Salazar is furious. He calls Horowitz and makes it clear he's done dealing with Rachel through lawyers. He wants to meet her himself. Rachel travels to the island, where Sid picks her up. During the drive, he gives her a special watch fitted with an emergency button. If she presses it, the team will immediately receive her location. Rachel also thinks about why Sid and Bronco have remained loyal to her for so long. Years earlier, during one of their first operations together, both men ended up imprisoned in Chiang Mai. Rachel was the person who got them out. They've stayed with her ever since. On the way to the hotel, Sid notices a vehicle following them. He realizes they're being watched but chooses not to react. Meanwhile, Salazar arrives at the hotel with his men and discusses the upcoming meeting. The microphones planted earlier allow Gucci to listen in from the team's base. But just as the conversation becomes useful, the signal starts cutting out. Rachel soon arrives with Bronco and Sid acting as her security. She sits down across from Salazar. After everything Rachel has done to his businesses and assets, Salazar finally puts a serious number on the table, $350 million. Rachel refuses. Salazar raises it to $400 million. She still says no. Rachel makes her position clear. The debt is $1 billion, and she intends to collect all of it. Salazar finally loses patience and ends the meeting. Back in the car, Rachel tells Clover to keep searching through Salazar's finances. She needs something even more damaging. Still frustrated by the failed negotiation, she asks Sid and Bronco to stop somewhere for a beer, instead of going directly back to the safe house. They choose a small cafe. At first, nothing seems wrong. Then Gucci notices several vehicles approaching through the drone feed. Men begin moving toward the cafe from different directions. 2 enter and sit near the back. Branco recognizes them from Salazar's hotel. Another 2 move toward the bar, while more men remain outside. The team quickly realizes Rachel has been surrounded. Branco quietly takes a towel from a waiter and places it over his lap, hiding his handgun as he prepares to draw. Sid also arms himself and moves toward the rear of the building. More attackers arrive outside. Everyone inside can feel the tension building. The waiter takes one look around the room and runs. Branco immediately opens fire, killing the 2 men seated at the back before they can react. The rest of the team moves at the same time. Sid intercepts an attacker in the kitchen and kills him. Baker takes down another man near the bar. Within seconds, the cafe turns into a firefight. Gucci watches the area remotely and tells Branco that the rear exit is clear. Branco quickly gets Rachel outside, while the others engage the gunmen waiting near the vehicles. Rachel's team shoots through the attackers before they can properly organize. Then Gucci spots 2 more men approaching quickly on a scooter. He warns Branco. Branco turns and shoots both before they reach the cafe. The attack is over within minutes. Despite being badly outnumbered, Rachel's team suffers no injuries. They split into different vehicles and leave before reinforcements can arrive. Olsen later reports to Salazar that the assassination failed. When Horowitz discovers what Salazar attempted, he's furious. He explains that trying to kill Rachel during an active billion-dollar financial dispute could give her exactly the legal opening she needs. Rachel may now be able to request emergency action from the courts, potentially exposing not only Salazar's legitimate companies, but also the businesses he has kept hidden for years. Salazar realizes how serious the situation has become and immediately calls Wolfgang, but it's already too late. Clover contacts Rachel with urgent news. Money is suddenly moving across Salazar's network. Funds are being transferred between accounts and companies as Salazar tries to hide his assets. Rachel sees this as an opportunity. Every transfer leaves a trail. She orders Clover to track the money and connect every secret company back to Salazar. Once ownership is proven, she wants those businesses identified and frozen. Rachel returns to the safe house while her legal team goes back to court. They secure international attachment orders covering Salazar's holdings. The effects are immediate. Companies are frozen one after another. Bank accounts are locked. Assets are seized. Businesses that once brought in huge amounts of money stop operating. Salazar's financial empire begins falling apart piece by piece. His people eventually realize Rachel must have access to information she shouldn't know. They search Wolfgang's office. Furniture, electronics, and decorations are inspected until they finally discover the transmitter hidden inside the statue Sid sent him. The device is removed, but they've found it far too late. Rachel has already identified most of Salazar's important companies and connected them to him. Soon, Salazar invites Rachel back to the hotel for another negotiation. This time, he offers $800 million. Rachel refuses again. She still wants the full billion. Then she reveals her final leverage. Rachel tells Salazar that if he refuses to pay, she'll send everything she's uncovered to the investors and business partners he has cheated or financially harmed over the years. Those people could come after him for nearly $5 billion. Salazar understands that continuing the fight could cost him far more than Rachel's original claim. He finally gives in. He orders Horowitz to arrange the full payment. Then he fires Horowitz on the spot. After leaving the hotel, Rachel calls Bobby and tells him the deal is done. Salazar has agreed to pay. 3 months later, however, Rachel still hasn't received the money she's owed. She's staying at an isolated desert compound and repeatedly tries calling Bobby. There is no answer. Then Rachel notices a vehicle approaching in the distance. She calls for her security guard. No response. She asks her assistant if she's seen him, but she hasn't. Rachel steps outside to investigate and soon finds the guard dead in the sand. She rushes back toward the tent. Her assistant has been killed as well. The approaching vehicle finally arrives. Olsen gets out. Rachel immediately understands what's happening. Salazar hasn't forgotten about her. Before Olsen can stop her, Rachel presses the emergency button on Sid's watch, activating the tracker. Then Olsen takes her away. Later that evening, Branco and Sid confront Bobby in her office. They tell her Rachel has been kidnapped by Salazar. Bobby claims the authorities are already handling the situation and says the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Spanish law enforcement have become involved. Branco and Sid have no faith in Bobby's official response. To them, she's hiding behind government agencies while Rachel remains in danger. They remind Bobby of the principle Rachel has enforced throughout the entire case. A debt is a debt, and Bobby still hasn't paid Rachel what she's owed. Meanwhile, Rachel is being held inside a prison under Salazar's control. Salazar visits her personally. His frozen assets still haven't been returned, and he's furious that Goldstein hasn't reversed the damage after their agreement. So Salazar has created his own bargaining chip, Rachel. He believes threatening her life will force Goldstein to act. Rachel tells him he's made a serious mistake. Goldstein hasn't even paid her after 3 months. If Bobby and Goldstein actually cared about her, they wouldn't have ignored their own obligation for this long. As far as they're concerned, Rachel tells him she's no longer useful. Salazar isn't interested in hearing it. He gives Rachel an ultimatum. Somehow, she must convince Goldstein to honor the agreement. If she fails, Salazar will kill her. Soon, Bronco, Sid, and the rest of the team return to the island. Everything they prepared during their earlier operation is still waiting for them. The safe house is intact, the vehicles remain hidden, the equipment is untouched, and their escape traps are still in place. This time, they're not preparing for a possible emergency. They're breaking Rachel out. The team splits up. Bronco and Sid put on police uniforms, take the police vehicle they acquired earlier, and drive straight to the station where Rachel is being held. The disguise works perfectly. They enter without being questioned and head toward the weapons room. When an officer comes too close, they quickly overpower and handcuff him before he can raise the alarm. They grab several firearms and move toward the cells. Only a few officers are guarding the area. Bronco and Sid take them down one by one, disarming some and beating others before locking the officers inside the cells themselves. They then give Rachel the keys. Rachel frees herself but stays hidden while Bronco and Sid move toward the station's main office. They enter with their weapons raised and order everyone inside to surrender. The officers hesitate until Bronco and Sid make it clear that resisting isn't an option. They drop their weapons. For a moment, the rescue is going exactly as planned. Then 5 more officers walk through the front entrance. Sid orders them to stop. Instead, they reach for their guns. Sid and Bronco immediately open fire. A close-range shootout erupts inside the station. The 2 men move through the office, taking down every officer who tries to fight back. But outside, more patrol cars are arriving. The building is quickly surrounded. Rachel, Sid, and Bronco are now trapped. That's when Baker steps in. Rather than using the front entrance, he creates a new way out. An explosion blows open the rear wall of the station. Through the smoke and debris, Rachel, Bronco, and Sid race through the opening and reunite with the rest of the team. Everyone piles into a getaway car. Police vehicles immediately give chase. The team speeds into the countryside using the same route they practiced over and over during their earlier preparations. They know every turn, but the police begin firing. Bullets slam into the getaway car, tearing through the bodywork and badly damaging the vehicle. Sid knows they won't last much longer, so he activates the explosives planted along the road. A series of landmines detonates beneath the pursuing police cars. The blasts disable the convoy, leaving the vehicles wrecked across the road, but the police still have another option. They launch a surveillance drone and continue tracking Rachel's team from the air. The group races toward the extraction point. When they arrive, the gyrocopters are already prepared for takeoff. For a moment, it looks like they've made it. Then the drone reaches them. It drops an explosive directly onto the building containing the aircraft. The structure erupts. The gyrocopters are destroyed, and 1 member of Rachel's team is killed in the blast. Their main escape plan is gone. Before they can recover, another hostile vehicle charges toward them. Rachel stays low inside the car, covering her ears as gunfire breaks out around her. Bronco, Sid, and the others fire back. Armed men jump from the approaching vehicle, but Rachel's team drops most of them almost immediately. A few attackers remain. Then Sid spots a nearby fuel tank. He shoots it. The tank explodes, killing the remaining gunmen and destroying their vehicle. With the area temporarily clear, the team switches to their second escape route. They split between the damaged car and 2 motorcycles. Soon, 3 more enemy vehicles appear behind them. The motorcycle riders let the convoy pass, then move in behind it. They open fire on the first truck. The driver loses control, and the vehicle crashes. 2 pursuers remain. Farther ahead, Bronco is already hidden near the trees. The second truck reaches the location of the trap they built earlier. Bronco activates it at exactly the right moment. The road collapses beneath the vehicle, sending the truck straight into the concealed pit. The banana pie finally works exactly as intended. Only 1 enemy vehicle is left. Bronco attacks from one side while the motorcycle riders close in from behind. Together, they overwhelm the men inside the final truck. With the pursuit stopped, Rachel and the others continue toward the safe house. As soon as they arrive, the entire team takes defensive positions. The team fortifies the safe house and prepares for another attack. Weapons are loaded, Every entrance is covered, and a drone is launched to watch the surrounding roads. It doesn't take long for Salazar's men to arrive. Two vehicles approach from one direction and hit the spike strips planted earlier. Their tires blow out, forcing the attackers to abandon the cars and continue on foot. At the same time, two more vehicles come from the opposite side. Baker triggers another group of mines. One vehicle is destroyed, but the other keeps coming. Now the safe house is under attack from both directions. Bronco, Sid, and the others open fire as Salazar's men shoot back. Bullets tear through the walls and windows, destroying furniture and equipment as the firefight grows more intense. While the others hold their positions, Baker starts preparing their final escape. He plants explosives throughout the house and opens the hidden entrance to the underground tunnel. As soon as the team gets an opening, Bronco orders everyone to move. They begin entering the tunnel one by one. Gucci reaches the ravine first and starts setting up the zip line they prepared earlier. But back at the safe house, someone still has to stay behind and trigger the explosives. Baker volunteers. Bronco refuses to leave him, but Baker knows they don't have another choice. Someone has to keep the attackers occupied long enough for Rachel and the others to escape. After a brief argument, Baker finally convinces him. Bronco reluctantly heads into the tunnel with Sid and Rachel. Baker remains alone inside the house. He releases a gas grenade, filling the rooms with smoke, then begins hunting the attackers as they enter. He keeps changing positions, striking from different parts of the building before disappearing again. Bronco repeatedly tells him through the radio to stop fighting and escape through the tunnel. Baker ignores him. Instead, he waits for more of Salazar's men to enter. Once enough attackers are inside and surrounding the building, Baker makes his move. He detonates the explosives. The entire safe house erupts in a massive blast. Baker is killed along with most of Salazar's men. Meanwhile, Rachel, Bronco, and Sid are still moving through the escape route. Several attackers survive the explosion and follow them to the ravine. As Rachel's group crosses using the zip line, the gunmen open fire. Bronco and Sid shoot back, keeping the attackers pinned down while everyone reaches the other side. None of them are hit. They quickly reach the ATVs hidden there earlier and race toward the dock, where the remaining team members are preparing a boat. Escape is finally within reach. Then a helicopter appears overhead. Olsen has found them. He flies after the ATV and opens fire. Bullets strike the ground around Rachel's group as Sid pushes the vehicle faster. Bronco fires back, but neither side can land a decisive shot. Then Olsen switches to a heavier weapon. Explosive rounds begin striking the road ahead of the ATV, forcing Sid to leave the open route and drive into a nearby structure for cover. Olsen circles around for another attack, but Bronco and Sid have one more weapon ready, a rocket launcher. They wait inside the building until the helicopter passes in front of an opening. The moment Olsen comes into view, they fire. The rocket hits the helicopter. It crashes near the shoreline and explodes, killing Olsen. With Salazar's security chief gone, Rachel reaches the dock and boards the boat with the surviving members of her team. She finally escapes the island. Bronco and Sid, however, stay behind. They still have unfinished business. Soon afterward, the two men approach Salazar's residence disguised as paramedics. The uniforms allow them to get close without drawing immediate attention. Once inside, they quietly overpower a guard and continue deeper into the building. Salazar eventually realizes they're there, but he reacts too late. Bronco gets close enough to inject him with a strong sedative. Salazar quickly passes out. They place him on a stretcher and wheel him outside. To anyone watching, it simply looks like two paramedics transporting an unconscious patient. They load him into an ambulance and leave. Getting Salazar out of the city requires another plan. His unconscious body is wrapped in plastic and secured to an ATV. Bronco and Sid then take him through the same storm drain system they tested earlier, avoiding the roads and slipping past Salazar's remaining forces. Near the coast, a ship is waiting. Salazar is taken aboard. Some time later, authorities in Miami receive a shipping container containing a very unexpected passenger, Salazar. The billionaire who had spent years protecting himself through money, influence, and hidden companies has now been delivered directly to law enforcement. Around the same time, Rachel visits Bobby again. As far as Bobby knows, Salazar has simply disappeared. Rachel doesn't explain what really happened. She only confirms that the money she was owed has finally been paid. Then she gives Bobby a warning. Rachel believes Bobby tried to double-cross her by withholding assets and manipulating the settlement after Salazar agreed to pay. Now that Salazar is in custody, that decision could create a much bigger problem. Salazar knows too much about Goldstein's operations. Once investigators start questioning him, Rachel expects him to cooperate in order to protect himself. And if he starts talking, he may reveal that Goldstein helped finance parts of his criminal network. Goldstein will then need someone to take the blame. Rachel believes that person will be Bobby. She leaves after delivering the warning. Soon afterward, Goldstein receives a phone call. The basic setup of In the Gray is actually pretty fun. You've got this massive billion-dollar debt sitting at the center of the story, a powerful man who has no intention of paying it back, and a team that operates somewhere between legal pressure, corporate muscle, espionage, and straight-up tactical force. So instead of a traditional heist where everyone is trying to steal the money, the movie basically flips that idea around. The money is already owed. The job is figuring out how to get it back. And on paper, that's a good hook. What makes it a little more interesting is that the team doesn't just kick down a door and start shooting. A huge part of the movie is about preparation. They study the opposition, work through different scenarios, build escape routes, use surveillance, manipulate situations, and try to stay several moves ahead. There's this constant sense that everybody is playing some version of chess, except half the pieces are lawyers and the other half have automatic weapons. I actually liked that idea more than I expected to. There's something satisfying about watching capable people prepare for things properly. A lot of action movies skip over that completely. Someone says, "Here's the plan," and 10 minutes later everything explodes. Here, the planning itself is part of the attraction. You see contingencies being discussed. You see different routes being tested. You get a sense that these people are supposed to be professionals, not random action heroes surviving through luck. The problem is that In the Gray likes its planning a little too much. There are stretches where the movie explains something, shows people preparing for that exact thing, and then later shows them actually doing it. By the third time you've gone through the same idea, some of the fun has already leaked out of it. Instead of wondering, how are they going to get out of this? You're sometimes sitting there thinking, right, this must be the part they explained 20 minutes ago. That's where the strategy starts working against the suspense. A clever plan is usually exciting because you either don't know the whole thing yet, or because something goes horribly wrong and the characters have to improvise. This movie often gives you so much information up front that it reduces the surprise. It wants you to admire how carefully everything has been constructed, but there are moments when I think it would have been smarter to simply trust the audience and let us discover the plan while it was happening. The film is also very aware of how clever it wants to appear. You can feel that in the way the characters talk about the operation, in the financial maneuvering, in the legal pressure, in the surveillance, in all these little moving pieces that are supposed to eventually fit together. Sometimes they do. Sometimes it feels like the movie is pointing at the puzzle before you've even had a chance to solve it yourself. And that's frustrating because the premise really doesn't need to be this complicated. Underneath all the layers, this is a pretty simple story. Somebody owes an enormous amount of money. A highly skilled group is brought in to recover it. The target is dangerous. The situation becomes increasingly hostile. Eventually, all that careful preparation has to survive contact with the real world. That simplicity isn't automatically a weakness either. Honestly, the debt collection angle gives the movie enough personality on its own. It's basically a heist movie where the protagonists are trying to take back something they believe already belongs to them. That creates an interesting little twist because the characters can see themselves as professionals doing a legitimate job even while their methods become increasingly questionable. That whole legal versus illegal gray area is probably where the title works best. You've got lawyers, corporations, financial institutions, covert operatives, powerful businessmen, and government influence all crossing into each other's territory. Nobody feels completely clean. The movie keeps playing around with the idea that respectable institutions and criminal methods can start looking surprisingly similar once enough money is involved. I just wish it pushed that idea further. There's potentially something interesting sitting underneath all of this about power, money, legality, and who gets to decide what is acceptable when the numbers become big enough. But the film mostly uses those ideas as fuel for the plot rather than really digging into them. It gives you the appearance of moral complexity, then quickly moves back to the operation, which is probably fine if you're watching this purely as an action thriller. The bigger issue is that the screenplay needs danger, and for long stretches, I never felt like the people carrying out the mission were genuinely losing control. These characters are almost too competent. Their surveillance works, their preparations work. Security systems that are supposed to be sophisticated can feel surprisingly easy to bypass. The opposition has plenty of manpower, but not always enough credibility. You keep hearing about how dangerous the situation is, yet the heroes move through so much of it with the confidence of people who already know they're going to win. That creates a weird problem. Watching experts do their jobs well can be entertaining. I like competence in movies. Not every hero needs to spend 2 hours making terrible decisions just so the story has drama. But there still has to be resistance. There has to be a moment where the plan starts breaking apart and you genuinely wonder whether these people are as prepared as they thought they were. In the Gray occasionally gets close to that feeling, but it doesn't live there long enough. The villains rarely seem capable of changing the entire game. There are obstacles, sure, but not many that completely destabilize the operation. And because the film spends so much time explaining how prepared the team is, every successful move from them can start feeling less like a surprise and more like confirmation. Of course, they had a backup plan. Of course, they anticipated this. Of course, somebody already thought of that. After a while, you start wanting anyone, to throw something into the story that these people didn't see coming. A serious betrayal could have done it. A major tactical mistake, a legal move that actually traps them. A twist that forces the whole operation to change shape halfway through, something that makes all that preparation suddenly feel inadequate. There are developments and reversals, but several of them are easy to see coming because the movie has a habit of telegraphing its intentions. It reveals just enough that you start putting pieces together before the characters reach the payoff. And again, I don't think the movie needed more complexity. It needed more uncertainty. That's different. Some of the legal and financial material also asks you to just go along with it. The movie presents certain courtroom decisions, financial maneuvers, surveillance methods, and institutional responses with enormous confidence. But if you start examining how quickly some of these things happen, the logic can get shaky. I wouldn't call that automatically fatal. This is not a documentary about international debt recovery. I'm not sitting there with a legal textbook checking every procedure. But the movie itself wants the operation to feel incredibly precise. That raises the standard. If your characters are constantly presented as strategic geniuses and the screenplay keeps emphasizing procedure, then the mechanics need to feel convincing enough that you don't start questioning them. When financial or legal processes begin functioning like magic buttons that move the plot toward the next action sequence, some of that carefully constructed credibility disappears. There's also an interesting genre problem running through the story. At different points, In the Gray feels like a heist movie, an espionage thriller, a corporate crime story, a tactical action film, and occasionally an action comedy. That mixture can be entertaining because the movie is constantly changing gears. One minute you're dealing with negotiations, then surveillance, then tactical planning, then somebody is preparing an extraction route. But it also means the movie never completely settles into one identity. If you want a pure action film, you may wonder why so much time is being spent discussing logistics. If you want a really clever heist movie, you may wish the plan contained more genuine surprises. If you want an espionage thriller, you may want the opposing side to feel more dangerous and unpredictable. And if you're interested in the moral side of the story, the film doesn't spend enough time there to really develop it. So the screenplay ends up living in the same gray area as the title. There's enough of several different genres to keep things moving, but maybe not enough of any one of them to make the movie feel completely distinctive. Still, I can't pretend the central idea doesn't work. A billion-dollar collection job treated like a military operation is a pretty entertaining concept. The legal side gives it a different flavor, the planning creates structure, and the whole thing has that pleasure of watching a team assemble a complicated solution to what initially looks like an impossible problem. I just think the movie mistakes preparation for tension a few too many times. The strongest version of this story probably keeps the same premise, keeps the same tactical mindset, but hides more information from us. Let the audience wonder. Let the plan fail in ways that actually hurt. Give the opposition a little more intelligence. Make those supposedly perfect professionals improvise, because the ingredients are there. The problem isn't that In the Gray has no ideas. It has plenty. It just explains some of its best ones before they have a chance to surprise you. You can tell almost immediately that In the Gray is a Guy Ritchie movie. It's in the editing, the attitude, the way people talk to each other, the expensive clothes, the confidence, the constant feeling that everybody in the room thinks they're the smartest person there. Even before the action really gets going, the movie is already moving like a Ritchie film. Quick cuts, slick camera work, clipped conversations, little bits of humor dropped into serious situations. For people who love that style, there's a lot here to enjoy. The movie has swagger. Maybe too much swagger at times, but it definitely has it. Even fairly basic scenes are dressed up with enough visual energy and personality that they rarely feel completely flat. Someone walks into a room, a plan gets discussed, a few insults are exchanged, and somehow Ritchie still finds a way to make it feel like everybody is performing in a much cooler version of reality. That's always been part of his appeal. He can take people standing around talking and make it feel like an event. When In the Gray is working, that confidence carries the movie. The dialogue has attitude. The characters bounce off one another. Jake Gyllenhaal and Henry Cavill get some deadpan exchanges that give the film a bit of life, and Eiza González has that calm, controlled delivery that fits the whole high-end fixer atmosphere. There are moments where the banter really does feel effortless. A line gets thrown out, somebody answers without changing expression, you get a quick reaction, then the movie is already moving on. That rhythm is very Ritchie. But there's another side to it, and I think this is where the movie becomes a lot more divisive. Sometimes the dialogue stops feeling sharp and starts feeling like dialogue that knows it's supposed to be sharp. There's a difference. You can almost feel the film waiting for you to notice how cool everybody sounds. The characters constantly speak with this level of confidence that can be entertaining for a while, but when nearly everyone is operating on the same frequency, the attitude starts losing its impact. Cool works best when it feels natural. Here, there are moments where it gets dangerously close to smug, and depending on your tolerance for Ritchie's style, that might either be part of the fun or exactly what drives you crazy. The comedy has the same problem. Some of it lands really well. There are these quick, dry interruptions that break up the seriousness without completely changing the tone. Gyllenhaal and Cavill are probably the strongest when the humor is understated. They can throw a line away and make it funnier by barely reacting to it, but a few running jokes get pushed too far. Once a joke works, the movie sometimes comes back to it again, and then again. And eventually you can feel the original spark disappearing. That's especially noticeable with some of the banter between Sid and Bronco. Depending on the viewer, those jokes may feel like playful chemistry or something the movie keeps leaning on after the point has already been made. And that's interesting because older Ritchie films often felt like the humor came out of the personalities. Here, sometimes it feels like the personalities exist so the movie can keep generating the humor. Small difference, big effect. The voiceover is another very Ritchie choice, and this is probably where his style helps and hurts the movie at the exact same time. He likes explaining how things work, who somebody is, why they matter, what the plan is. What the backup plan is, what happens if the backup plan fails. At first, that narration gives the movie momentum. There's a pleasure in being introduced to a complicated operation through fast explanations while the visuals keep moving underneath it. It gives the whole thing that familiar feeling of someone telling you a clever story at high speed. But In the Gray leans on it heavily, very heavily. There are stretches where I started wondering whether the movie trusted the images enough to do the storytelling on their own, because Ritchie is absolutely capable of visual storytelling. You see that whenever the action takes over, the camera becomes more expressive. The editing tells you where people are, what they're doing, and how different parts of the operation connect. And then 5 minutes later, somebody is explaining another plan to you. That's the frustrating part. The movie has the visual confidence to show us what's happening, but it keeps falling back on narration like it's worried we might miss how clever everything is. It doesn't ruin the movie, not for me, but it does make the film feel more self-conscious than it needs to. There are also these stylistic flourishes, text on screen, graphic touches, little presentation tricks that are clearly meant to add personality. Some viewers will probably enjoy that because it fits Ritchie's whole visual language. Others might find certain choices a little dated, like the movie is reaching back toward the late 90s or early 2000s idea of what cinematic cool looked like. That basically describes the film as a whole. It feels like two versions of Guy Ritchie meeting each other. You've got the earlier Ritchie, the fast-talking criminals, the cheeky attitude, the visual tricks, the playful structure. Then you've got the later blockbuster Ritchie, the polished action, international locations, larger stars, bigger equipment, cleaner production. In the Gray sits somewhere between those two modes. And I actually think that's one of the more interesting things about it, because despite all the familiar Ritchie fingerprints, the actual setup doesn't always feel like one of his traditional crime movies. This isn't really a bunch of chaotic small-time criminals accidentally destroying each other's plans. These people are supposed to be elite. They're organized, professional, extremely well-equipped. They move through the world like they've done this 50 times before. At points, the movie feels closer to an espionage thriller or a tactical mission film than the kind of British crime comedy people usually associate with Ritchie. There are shades of a heist movie, a bit of spy cinema, a little corporate thriller, a lot of tactical action, then comedy sitting around the edges, and that genre mixture is probably why the film feels slightly unusual, even while the filmmaking itself feels incredibly familiar. One reviewer comparison in the material basically placed it somewhere between James Bond, Ocean's 11, and a Guy Ritchie action movie, and I can see why that comparison comes up. It has the polished international flavor of espionage cinema. It has the planning and team mechanics of a heist. Then whenever somebody starts talking, shooting, or blowing something up, Ritchie's personality takes over again. The downside is that the film never completely becomes any of those things. It isn't quite clever enough to be a top-tier con movie. It isn't dangerous enough to become a really tense espionage thriller. It doesn't fully unleash itself as a giant action spectacle either. And the comedy is present, but depending on the scene, it can feel either sharp or strangely restrained. So what genre is in the gray, exactly? Honestly, kind of all of them, and kind of none of them completely. That sounds like criticism, but it isn't entirely. There's an easy watchability that comes from constantly changing modes. If the negotiations are starting to drag, the movie shifts toward planning. If the planning starts feeling too procedural, somebody makes a joke. Eventually the guns come out and the whole thing becomes much more physical. It keeps moving, it keeps changing texture. That variety helps. Where I think people are going to split is whether they still find Ritchie's filmmaking exciting simply because it's recognizably his. If you're already a fan, there are moments here that are probably going to hit exactly the way you want them to. The editing is energetic, the actors look great, the dialogue has bite, the action has style. The whole movie carries itself like it has absolutely no doubt that it's cool, and sometimes that confidence is contagious. You just go with it. Then there are moments where I found myself thinking, I've seen this move before. I've heard this rhythm before. I know what this joke is doing. I know what this editing trick is trying to accomplish. That's where the accusation of Ritchie working on autopilot starts to make sense, not because the movie is badly directed. It really isn't. If anything, the technical confidence is obvious. The question is whether confidence is enough when the style itself has become so familiar. One interpretation is that Ritchie is simply repeating himself. Another is that he's deliberately calming things down. There are parts of In the Gray that feel more controlled than his most chaotic work. The camera isn't constantly screaming for attention. The action can be surprisingly grounded. The humor is often dry rather than completely outrageous. Even the overall tone feels more restrained than you might expect from this kind of premise. I can see somebody calling that mature. I can also see somebody calling it tired. That's kind of the whole movie. The exact same creative decision can look disciplined from one angle and underpowered from another. Even the international setting feeds into that debate. Some viewers seem to enjoy Ritchie taking his usual style into this larger, more global world of corporate power and covert operations. It gives the movie a slick, jet-set quality. Others feel his voice works better when it's rooted in the British criminal environments that made his earlier films distinctive. Take that personality out of that world, and maybe some of the humor, rhythm, and character types start feeling less organic. I don't think the movie gives you a definitive answer either way. What it does prove is that Ritchie's style is still recognizable within seconds. That's not nothing. A lot of directors could make a movie with this basic premise, and it would just be another anonymous action thriller. In the Gray never feels anonymous, even when it's predictable, even when the narration is overdoing it, even when a joke hangs around a little too long, even when the characters are trying so hard to look cool that you can practically see the sunglasses coming toward the camera. It still feels like somebody made it. There's a personality behind it. Whether that personality still feels fresh is the real question. For some people, this will be classic Guy Ritchie doing exactly what Guy Ritchie does best. For others, it'll feel like a filmmaker going back to the same toolbox because he knows every tool inside it. I landed somewhere in the middle. There are definitely moments where the style carries scenes that probably wouldn't survive without it. The editing gives ordinary material momentum. The actors understand the rhythm. The dry humor occasionally hits perfectly. And when the action, dialogue, music, and camera work all line up, you remember exactly why this formula became so appealing in the first place. I just wish the movie surprised me with that style a little more often. Because In the Gray doesn't really have a Guy Ritchie identity problem. If anything, it has the opposite problem. It knows exactly whose movie it is, maybe a little too well. The cast is probably the easiest thing to sell about In the Gray. You put Eiza González, Jake Gyllenhaal, Henry Cavill, Rosamund Pike, Fisher Stevens, Christopher Hivju, and Carlos Bardem in the same movie, and yeah, I'm interested. That lineup alone creates expectations. Not even because every actor needs some huge dramatic showcase, but because you assume a cast like this is going to bring personality into every corner of the film. And to be fair, a lot of the time they do. The problem is that the actors are often giving the movie more personality than the characters actually have on the page. That difference becomes pretty noticeable. Eiza González is basically the center of the operation, and I can completely understand why some people came away thinking she was the standout. She has the confidence the role needs. She carries herself like somebody who is used to walking into dangerous rooms and being the one person who still thinks she has control of the conversation. There's a very deliberate calmness to the performance. She doesn't need to be the loudest person in the scene because the character is supposed to have power before she even starts talking. For some viewers, that works extremely well. She gives the film a kind of sharpness that helps hold all the planning and exposition together. And considering how much of this movie depends on somebody explaining complicated situations without completely killing the energy, that's not a small job. I also like that the movie allows her to actually lead. She isn't standing around while Cavill and Gyllenhaal handle everything. She's the person driving the operation, making decisions, negotiating, reading the room, and essentially directing these guys toward the next objective. That said, I can also see why the casting didn't work for everybody. A few reactions to the film question whether González fully sells the ruthless, almost untouchable authority that the character is supposed to have. There's an argument that the role needed somebody who felt older, colder, maybe more naturally intimidating. Rosamund Pike gets brought up in that conversation quite a bit because she has this naturally severe screen presence, and I can understand why someone might look at the two roles and wonder what the movie would have felt like if their positions had been different. I don't necessarily think that means González is bad. It's more that the character asks her to sell a lot without giving her much underneath it. We're told this woman is brilliant. We're told she's dangerous. We're told people are willing to follow her into ridiculous situations. But the screenplay doesn't always give us enough personal material to understand why. That becomes an even bigger issue with Sid and Bronco. Henry Cavill and Jake Gyllenhaal are exactly the kind of actors you want in a movie like this because they can make standing around in expensive clothes feel like a scene. Gyllenhaal probably gets the most mileage out of what he's given. There's a looseness to him that helps. He can make a little look, a throwaway response, or a dry line feel more alive than it probably was on the page. Even when the dialogue isn't doing much, he has enough natural screen energy to keep you watching. Cavill is playing in a slightly different register. He has that very controlled, almost immovable coolness that actually works pretty well beside Gyllenhaal because the contrast gives their scenes texture. Gyllenhaal can be a little more elastic. Cavill sits there like he's already decided how the conversation is going to end. Together, they're fun, not constantly brilliant, not some all-time action pairing, but fun. And honestly, there are stretches where their chemistry is doing a lot of heavy lifting. The movie clearly wants Sid and Bronco to feel like guys who have done this kind of work together for a long time. There's casual banter, dry jokes, little bits of irritation, and that comfortable rhythm people develop when they already know how the other person is going to react. Some of that lands really well. Other parts feel like the film is trying a little too hard to convince you these guys have history. That's the recurring problem with the characters in the Gray. History is implied more often than it is actually felt. We're given a tiny amount of backstory, explaining why these men are so loyal to the woman leading them. Apparently, she helped them out of a terrible situation in the past, and that's supposed to do a lot of emotional work very quickly. I get the idea. She saved them. They trust her. Now they'll go through hell for her. Perfectly functional. But functional isn't the same as emotionally convincing. When the movie asks you to believe in that level of loyalty, I wanted just a little more. Not a 30-minute flashback, not some giant trauma monologue, just a scene or two where you actually feel the relationship underneath the mission. Because without that, these people can start feeling like job descriptions. The lawyer. The muscle, the other muscle. The corporate boss. The villain. The enforcer. The technical guy. Everybody has a function. Not everybody gets to become a person. And this is where the cast almost works against the film, because these are recognizable, charismatic actors. You naturally expect more from them. You see Gyllenhaal and Cavill standing there, and your brain starts filling in depth that the screenplay hasn't necessarily earned. The movie benefits from that, but it also exposes the writing. There are moments where you think, imagine what these scenes would feel like with performers who didn't have this much presence, probably much flatter. Rosamund Pike is a good example of that. She doesn't need a huge amount of screen time to give a character authority. She walks into a scene, and you immediately understand that this person has power. That helps. But the role itself can still feel more like a mechanism in the story than somebody you're deeply interested in. She exists to represent the corporation, push the operation forward, make decisions, complicate things later. There's presence there, but not necessarily much emotional access. Fisher-Stevens gets some enjoyable moments too. There's at least a little flavor whenever he shows up, and some reviewers clearly found him one of the more entertaining supporting players. Carlos Bardem has the opposite problem in a way. The story needs him to feel like a serious threat because the entire operation is built around how dangerous this situation supposedly is. But the character doesn't always generate that danger on his own. You understand that he has money. You understand that he has power. You understand that he has men around him who are supposed to be dangerous. But intimidation in a movie can't just come from people saying someone is intimidating. At some point, you have to feel it, and I'm not sure the supporting villains are given enough space to build that kind of presence. Christopher Hivju's character has the look of somebody you assume is eventually going to become a major physical problem, but even that setup doesn't necessarily lead to the kind of confrontation you expect. That matters because the heroes are so competent. If your protagonists are elite operators who always look calm, always have a plan, and are usually 3 steps ahead, then the opposition has to be terrifying enough to push back. Otherwise, you don't get tension, you get efficiency. There's a point in the movie where a team member makes a sacrifice, and this is probably the clearest example of the emotional problem. On paper, it should hurt. Someone gives his life so the others can keep moving. That should be the moment where all the cool surfaces crack for a second, but the film hasn't spent enough time making that person matter to us. So instead of feeling devastated, you mostly register the event. Oh, that happened. And then the story continues. That's rough because you can see exactly what the scene is trying to do. It's not badly conceived. It just hasn't been prepared emotionally. You can't create attachment retroactively. That's one of the reasons the movie can feel strangely weightless even when people are being shot at and things are exploding around them. The physical stakes are there. The emotional stakes are much thinner. Now, I don't think every action movie needs deep character studies. Sometimes a cool team of professionals doing a difficult job is enough. And there are reviewers who clearly responded to exactly that. They liked the characters because they felt grounded, efficient, and believable within this specific world. The smaller interactions were enough. Nobody needed a tragic childhood or a giant emotional arc. I understand that argument. There's actually something refreshing about characters who aren't constantly stopping the movie to explain their feelings. But there's a middle ground. You don't need melodrama. You do need connection. And in the gray sometimes confuses being emotionally restrained with simply not developing people very much. It also affects how likable the team feels. The movie obviously wants them to be cool, very cool, tailored clothes, calm voices, perfect timing, dry jokes, total confidence. Depending on the scene, it works. Then occasionally that confidence crosses over into smugness. And that's a dangerous line, because once the heroes start feeling too pleased with themselves, you need either vulnerability or consequences to balance that out. There isn't always enough of either. One reviewer made an interesting point about classic Bond-style confidence. The really effective version of that character can appear totally calm, while the audience still senses that underneath the surface, he understands the danger. That little crack makes the confidence exciting. Here, these characters often seem genuinely unconcerned. If they're not worried, why should I be? That's especially noticeable with Cavill and Gyllenhaal, because both actors are naturally good at looking like they belong in this world. You almost want the screenplay to knock them off balance, more often just to see what happens. Give Gyllenhaal a moment where the jokes stop working. Give Cavill a situation he genuinely cannot brute force or plan around. Give González a decision where her confidence costs somebody something. Those are the moments that could have turned a stylish team into people you actually remember. Still, I wouldn't call the performances a weakness. Far from it. This is one of those movies where I walked away thinking the cast is probably the reason the whole thing remains as watchable as it is. González gives it control. Gyllenhaal gives it personality. Cavill gives it presence. Pike gives it authority. The supporting actors keep the world populated with people who feel more interesting than the amount of material they receive. That's a pretty good foundation. It just feels like the screenplay assumes charisma can replace characterization. Sometimes it can. For 90 minutes, maybe even surprisingly often. But when the movie finally asks you to care, really care, about loyalty, sacrifice, betrayal, survival, whatever is happening in that moment, you notice how little time you've actually spent getting to know these people. And that's the frustrating part, because this cast absolutely could have carried something richer. You can already see flashes of the movie that might have been there. A stronger relationship between Sid and Bronco, more history with their leader. A villain who genuinely scares them, a little more friction inside the team. Anything that forces these cool, controlled people to stop performing competence for a minute and actually reveal themselves. Instead, In the Gray mostly keeps everybody looking good, talking well, and moving toward the next piece of the operation. Entertaining, yeah, memorable characters. That's a tougher sell. The cast gives the movie faces you want to watch. I just wish the script had given those faces more to feel. One of the strangest things about In the Gray is that it somehow feels fast and slow at the same time. That sounds contradictory, but I think that's exactly what the movie is doing. The editing is quick, scenes move fast, people talk fast, information is constantly being thrown at you. The movie rarely sits still for very long, and on a purely mechanical level, there's always something happening, but dramatically. It takes a while before the film really feels like it has started. The opening throws you straight into this world of operatives, lawyers, money, surveillance, negotiations, contingency plans, and people who apparently already know each other very well. For the first 10 or 15 minutes, I was mostly trying to figure out who everyone was and what role they were supposed to be playing. The movie doesn't really ease you into anything. It just starts moving and assumes you'll catch up. And eventually you do. Once the pieces become clearer, the pace becomes a lot easier to enjoy. The first hour especially is basically the team being assembled, the problem being defined, and this increasingly elaborate operation starting to take shape. If you like planning in movies, there's definitely something satisfying about that. If you came expecting Henry Cavill and Jake Gyllenhaal to start shooting people every 5 minutes, though, you might spend a decent chunk of the first half wondering where the action movie went. That's where some of the criticism makes sense. For a film marketed around elite operatives and tactical action, In the Gray spends a surprisingly large amount of time talking about what might happen instead of actually letting it happen. The movie can feel like it's accelerating even when it hasn't really moved anywhere emotionally. That's a weird distinction, but an important one. The edits are fast, the payoff is not. You can have a scene where people are talking very quickly, cutting between locations, explaining 3 different parts of a plan, and technically the movie has a lot of momentum. But if I'm still waiting for the main conflict to really kick in, it can still feel slow. And In the Gray lives in that zone for a while, then the action arrives. And to be fair, when Ritchie finally lets the movie become physical, it gets a lot more fun. The gunfights have clarity. You can usually tell where people are and what they're trying to accomplish. That sounds basic, but plenty of action movies turn every firefight into a blender of shaky cameras and random cuts. Here, there's usually an actual tactical objective behind the shooting. Characters move with purpose. They use cover, they split up, they communicate. Vehicles aren't just there because somebody thought a chase would look cool. They're worked into the operation. There are cars, off-road vehicles, motorcycles, boats, helicopters. The whole thing starts feeling like a large tactical playground once the second half opens up. And I really like that the characters generally behave like professionals. They aren't constantly making stupid decisions just so the screenplay can create another action scene. They prepare. They anticipate problems. They know what they're doing. There's a pleasure in watching competent people be competent. The downside, of course, is that competence can absolutely destroy suspense if the movie isn't careful. That's probably the biggest action problem here. The heroes are so prepared that you rarely feel like they've genuinely lost control. They have a plan, then another plan, then an escape route, then another escape route, then some backup for the backup. After a while, you're not really wondering whether they're going to survive. You're wondering which previously explained solution the movie is about to use. And those are not the same kind of tension. The film definitely tries to create jeopardy. People are chasing them, guns are firing, buildings are getting hit, there are bodies dropping, but suspense is not the same as activity. You can put 50 armed men on screen and still have zero tension if the audience believes those 50 guys have absolutely no chance of hitting the protagonists. And there are moments in the Gray where the opposition starts feeling less like a genuine threat and more like targets waiting for the heroes to deal with them. That weakens some otherwise good action scenes, because technically, they're well done. There are shootouts here that look great. There are chase sequences that have real momentum. The camera movement becomes much more dynamic once everything starts going wrong. The sound has punch. The explosions have weight. You can tell there's a lot of craft underneath the spectacle. I especially like the moments where the film seems to be relying on real pyrotechnics and practical stunt work. There's just something different about an actual explosion. You feel the weight of it. The debris moves differently. Actors react to something physically happening around them. The camera captures that little bit of chaos that CGI can imitate, but not always perfectly. And because some of the practical effects look so convincing, the digital effects stand out more when they're less convincing. That contrast is actually kind of unfortunate. You'll have a sequence where something explodes and it looks heavy and messy and physical, and then another shot has that slightly cleaner, more artificial feeling. Nothing disastrous. It's not like the visual effects suddenly destroy the movie. But when the practical work is that good, your eye starts noticing when something doesn't have the same weight. The overall technical presentation is still one of the stronger aspects of the film. The locations help a lot. This movie looks expensive even when it may not always behave like a giant blockbuster. You get these jet-set environments, luxury spaces, open landscapes, expensive vehicles, villas, roads, coastlines. Everything has this polished international look that fits the characters, because these are supposed to be people operating in a world where money basically removes normal limitations. There's also a nice contrast between the elegant surroundings and the chaos that eventually tears through them. Perfectly dressed people, beautiful location, then somebody starts unloading an automatic weapon, very Guy Ritchie. The cinematography is generally clean too. I wouldn't say the camera is constantly showing off, but it knows when to become more aggressive. During conversations, the film can be pretty controlled. Then when the operation starts collapsing into action, the visual language gets looser and more energetic. That shift works. You feel the movie changing gears. The sound design helps there as well. Gunfire has impact. Vehicles feel heavy. Explosions don't just look big, they actually sound dangerous. And the score mostly understands when to stay out of the way. It doesn't feel like the music is constantly screaming. This is tense. Instead, there are these rhythmic, percussive elements underneath scenes that keep things moving without overpowering them. That restraint actually works well with the tactical tone. The music supports the operation, rather than turning every scene into a trailer. There are sections where the score is probably doing more work than you consciously notice, especially during the planning and suspense beats. Which brings us back to suspense, because this movie clearly understands how to build the appearance of tension. The music is there, the editing is there, the characters are checking routes, people are being watched, someone might be kidnapped. Plans are changing, vehicles are moving into position, all the pieces are technically present, and there were definitely moments where I felt nervous. The problem is that the screenplay sometimes reveals so much of the machinery beforehand that the technical craft is fighting an uphill battle. You can hear the tense music, you can see the rapid cutting, but in the back of your head you're also thinking, okay, they already practiced this. That takes some air out of the scene. Imagine how much stronger some of these sequences would be if we didn't know the full plan. If we were discovering the escape route at the same time the characters were using it. If something suddenly failed and there wasn't an obvious contingency ready. If the villain did one thing nobody predicted. That's the version of the movie where the action could have gone from entertaining to genuinely gripping. Instead, a lot of the suspense comes from execution rather than uncertainty. Will they pull off the thing we already know they intend to do? For some people, that's enough. There's absolutely an appeal in seeing a plan move from theory to reality. It's almost like watching a complicated machine finally turn on. You've been shown all the pieces. Now you get to watch them work. I understand why some viewers love that. And when all those pieces start coming together in the later sections, the movie does have a satisfying rhythm. The second half is unquestionably livelier than the first. The rescue and escape material gives the film the urgency it was missing earlier. Suddenly, all that talk about routes, vehicles, weapons, contingencies, and security actually has a purpose. The movie starts cashing the checks it spent the first hour writing. My issue is that the balance feels slightly off. We spend so much time preparing for the action that some of the action almost feels shorter than the explanation. That's why I understand the people who say the movie needed another 20 or 30 minutes. Normally, I would never look at a fast action thriller and think, you know what this needs, more runtime. But here, maybe it does. Not more exposition, absolutely not. More breathing room. Let us sit with the team for a little longer. Let the mission develop. Separate the planning from the execution instead of stacking them on top of each other. Give the villains time to become genuinely threatening. Then when everything goes wrong, the action would feel earned rather than scheduled. There are also a couple of action expectations the movie sets up and never really pays off. You've got intimidating henchmen. You've got Cavill and Gyllenhaal. You naturally expect somebody to eventually throw away the guns and have a proper physical confrontation. And not really. The film is much more interested in shootouts, vehicles, tactical positioning, and large-scale escape mechanics than traditional hand-to-hand combat. Depending on what you want from an action movie, that may not bother you at all. But I understand why some viewers felt like a major confrontation was missing, especially when the film seems to tease one. You can't give me the tough guy stare down and then not let those guys eventually hit each other. There are rules. Not official rules, obviously, but come on. The third act is probably where all of these strengths and weaknesses collide. Technically, it's the most exciting stretch. The pace is aggressive, there's more action, the planning starts paying off. The practical effects get room to shine. The movie finally becomes the large tactical action thriller it has been promising. And yet, if you've already predicted how several pieces will fall into place, it can also feel strangely safe. That's why reactions to the ending are so different. Some viewers find it satisfying because all the preparation finally clicks together. Others find it flat because the outcome never feels seriously in doubt. I landed somewhere between those positions. I enjoyed watching the operation unfold. I just didn't feel the level of anxiety that the movie clearly wanted me to feel, and I think that's the best way to describe In the Gray technically. It's impressive in motion, the camera work is polished, the action is readable, the vehicles and explosions give it scale, the sound design has weight, the locations look fantastic, the editing keeps everything moving at an almost ridiculous speed. But underneath all that craft, the movie is sometimes missing the one thing technical expertise can't manufacture by itself: uncertainty. I can admire a perfectly executed escape. I'm just going to care a lot more if, for a few minutes, I honestly believe it might not work. In the Gray is one of those movies where I completely understand both sides of the reaction. I can understand somebody walking out saying, "That was a blast." I can also understand somebody else leaving the exact same screening wondering how a movie with this cast, this director, and this much polish ended up feeling so disposable. That's kind of where the movie lives, somewhere in the middle, and weirdly enough, that probably makes the title more appropriate than anything else. I went into it expecting something fairly lightweight, especially considering how little noise seemed to surround the release. For a Guy Ritchie movie starring people like Jake Gyllenhaal, Henry Cavill, Eiza González, and Rosamund Pike, you'd expect a lot more attention around it. Instead, it almost felt like the movie just appeared. A few posters, a little promotion, then suddenly it was here. That lack of build-up probably lowered expectations for some viewers, and honestly, that may have helped the film. Because if you go into In the Gray expecting some major reinvention of the action thriller, I think you're setting yourself up for disappointment. It's not that movie. It isn't trying to completely change the genre. It doesn't have some unbelievable twist that makes you rethink everything you watched. It's not especially deep. It's not particularly subtle. And I seriously doubt anybody is going to spend weeks debating what it all meant. But if your expectation is basically, give me attractive movie stars, expensive locations, tactical action, dry jokes, a ridiculously elaborate plan, and Guy Ritchie making everything look cooler than it probably has any right to, then yeah, there's a decent chance you're going to have fun. Sometimes that really is enough, and I think that's why the reaction to this movie has been so strange. A lot of its weaknesses are also things certain viewers simply aren't going to care about. The story is familiar, okay. The characters aren't incredibly deep, fine. The heroes are probably too competent, sure. The villains could be more threatening, definitely. But if you're already enjoying Cavill and Gyllenhaal bouncing off each other while the operation keeps moving, you might not be sitting there worrying about any of that. You're just watching the movie, and there are stretches where In the Gray is very easy to watch. It has that kind of slick momentum where you realize 40 minutes have passed without really noticing. The locations are attractive. The cast looks like they belong in this ridiculous world. The action has enough physicality to wake the film up whenever the dialogue starts getting heavy. There's always another part of the plan being introduced, another piece being moved, another escape route being prepared. It's busy, maybe too busy, but rarely completely lifeless. That's important because some of the criticism around this movie makes it sound like there is absolutely nothing enjoyable here, and I don't think that matches what's actually in the material. Even several of the negative reactions still acknowledge the same things. The movie looks good, the technical work is strong, the actors have presence, some of the action is genuinely entertaining, there are moments of humor that work. So even the people who dislike it aren't necessarily saying it's incompetent, they're saying it's disappointing, and those are two very different criticisms. The disappointment mostly comes from potential. Look at the ingredients: Guy Ritchie, Jake Gyllenhaal, Henry Cavill, Eiza González, Rosamund Pike, a billion-dollar international recovery operation, espionage, explosions, lawyers behaving like tactical commanders. You hear all of that and your imagination starts building a pretty exciting movie before the actual movie even begins. That's dangerous, because once expectations get that high, simply being competent starts feeling like a missed opportunity. And I think In the Gray suffers from that. If this exact film came from a filmmaker nobody knew and starred a bunch of less recognizable actors, maybe people would be more forgiving. But when Ritchie is directing this cast, you expect personality. You expect something a little strange, something dangerous, maybe even something messy but memorable. This is polished almost to the point where some of that personality gets sanded down. It works, it does the job, it completes the mission, and then you start asking yourself whether completing the mission was enough. For some people, absolutely. There are reactions calling this one of the most entertaining Ritchie films in quite a while. Some people loved the speed, loved the action, loved the cast, loved the familiar attitude. A few viewers even put it among their favorites of the year and immediately wanted to watch it again, and I can see where that enthusiasm comes from. When the movie clicks, it's effortless entertainment. You don't have to work very hard. You can just sit there and let the machinery run. There's something nice about that. Not every movie needs to completely rearrange your brain. Sometimes you want 2 hours of stylish nonsense where professionals execute absurd plans while looking incredibly relaxed about everything. Nothing wrong with that. But there's also a large group of reactions that basically says, yeah, but Guy Ritchie used to make this kind of thing feel special. And that criticism hits harder. Because In the Gray is constantly reminding you of other movies without necessarily becoming the movie you'll remember instead of them. You can see bits of heist cinema, bits of spy movies, bits of Ritchie's older crime work, bits of his larger modern action films. The problem is that the movie doesn't always find that one element that belongs completely to itself. The debt collection premise comes closest. That's a fun spin. I wish the rest of the movie had been as distinctive as that central idea. Instead, once everything starts unfolding, a lot of it settles into recognizable territory. The ultra-capable team, the wealthy villain, the complicated plan. The double crosses, the escape, the endless armed men who exist mainly to be eliminated. You've seen variations of these pieces before, and familiarity isn't inherently bad. Execution matters. But if you're using familiar ingredients, you need either exceptional character work, exceptional suspense, or some kind of personality strong enough to make the formula feel new again. In the Gray gets halfway there on personality. The other interesting question is whether this really belongs in a theater. The reactions are split on that too. Visually, I get the argument for the big screen. The landscapes look good. The vehicle sequences benefit from scale. The explosions have more impact. There's enough technical polish here that you're not watching something that feels cheap or visually designed only for television. But at the same time, I completely understand the streaming movie comments. Not because it looks like one, more because it feels like the kind of movie you could casually put on at home on a Friday night, enjoy for a couple of hours, then move on with your life. There isn't necessarily that urgency of, you need to experience this right now. It's more, yeah, when you get around to it, you'll probably have a decent time. And honestly, that may be where this movie eventually finds its audience. It's easy viewing, it has famous actors, it's accessible. The plot is simple enough to follow even when the movie spends too much time explaining it. There's action, there's comedy, there's style. It's exactly the kind of thing people discover later and say, wait, why did nobody talk about this? Whether that turns into genuine appreciation or just background entertainment depends on how much you connect with the Ritchie formula. Because if you already dislike his style, I really don't think this is the movie that's going to convert you. Everything people criticize about his filmmaking is here. The self-aware coolness, the constant explaining, the smug characters, the elaborate plotting, the fast editing, the banter, the obsession with making everybody look 10% cooler than they logically should. If that annoys you, In the Gray gives you plenty of ammunition, but if you're already on his wavelength, different story, you might forgive a lot. That's where I think the extreme reactions come from. One person watches the movie and sees Ritchie repeating himself. Another watches the same thing and says, yes, exactly. This is what I came for. Neither reaction is particularly difficult to understand. My problem is that I kept bouncing between them while watching it. There were moments where I was completely in, a good exchange between the actors. A slick piece of action, a plan suddenly coming together. One of those sequences where the editing, music, and camera work create that effortless Ritchie rhythm, and I'd think, okay, this is working. Then the movie would spend another chunk of time explaining something I already understood, or the villains would fail to create much resistance, or a supposedly emotional moment would land without enough weight behind it. And suddenly I'd start seeing the machinery again. That's never ideal. The best version of this kind of movie makes you forget the formula. In the Gray sometimes makes the formula very visible. Still, I wouldn't call it a failure. That feels too harsh. There's too much competence here for that. Too much polish, too much charisma, too many sequences that genuinely work. I also wouldn't put it anywhere near the top of what the material describes as Ritchie's stronger work. It doesn't have enough character. It doesn't have enough danger. And for a movie built around complicated strategy, it doesn't surprise you nearly as often as it should. But I had fun with parts of it, more than I expected, actually. And sometimes that's the weirdest position to be in as a reviewer. You can see everything that's wrong with a movie while still enjoying yourself. You know the characters need more depth. You know the screenplay is over-explaining things. You know the story is familiar. You know the heroes have too much plot armor. And then an explosion goes off, Jake Gyllenhaal makes some dry comment, Henry Cavill looks completely unbothered by another impossible situation, and you think, Yeah, okay, I'm still watching. That's in the gray for me. A movie that's easier to enjoy than it is to defend. If you want something deep, unpredictable, or emotionally rich, this probably isn't going to satisfy you. If you're looking for a slick action thriller with a great-looking cast, a complicated mission, some entertaining tactical sequences, and enough Guy Ritchie attitude to fill every expensive suit on screen, there's definitely fun to be had. I wouldn't call it essential. I wouldn't call it terrible either. It's somewhere between those extremes, which might sound like the safest possible verdict, but this time it actually fits. In the Gray is polished, entertaining, frustratingly underdeveloped, occasionally very fun, and probably more disposable than a movie with this much talent should be. For some people, that'll be enough. For others, it'll feel like a missed opportunity. For me, I enjoyed the ride. I just wish I remembered more of it once it was over.